The town of Ashford had always been quiet, a place where the streets emptied by 9, where the church bells marked time more faithfully than any clock, and where secrets were buried deeper than the graves in its old cemetery. But silence has a way of amplifying what hides beneath it. And in Ashford, silence was the perfect vessel for fear. This is the story of how that fear found a new home. Evelyn Carter moved to Ashford in late autumn, seeking solitude after the messy collapse of her marriage. She rented a small, isolated Victorian house on the edge of town. Its windows were tall and narrow, like suspicious eyes, and its woodwork was scarred by decades of unforgiving weather. The locals had a name for it, the Hollow House. They spoke the name in hushed tones with a kind of reluctant reverence, as if the words themselves might draw unwanted attention. On her very first night, Evelyn noticed something was wrong. The air inside the house felt heavier, denser than the crisp autumn air outside, as if the walls themselves were slowly pressing inward. Shadows clung to corners for a moment too long, stretching and twisting when she wasn't looking directly at them. Every creak of the ancient floorboards seemed deliberate, like the sound of careful footsteps pacing just out of sight. She tried to dismiss it all as nerves, the natural jitters of a new beginning in an old, unfamiliar place. But nerves don't whisper. It began as a faint murmur, a soft, dry breath against her ear when she was completely alone. The sound was so subtle she'd question if she heard it at all. The words were impossible to catch, just stray syllables dissolving into the ambient static of the old house. But then, one night, as she sat journaling by the low light of a single lamp, trying to untangle the knots in her mind, she heard it clearly. The voice was cold, intimate, and right beside her. "I am fear." Evelyn froze. Her pen slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the floor. The words she'd just written on the page blurred as the whisper echoed again in the sudden, profound silence of the room. "I am fear. I live here." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet. She shot up from her chair, her eyes darting around the room, into the shadowy hallway, toward the dark maw of the kitchen. Nothing. No one. Only the oppressive silence that now felt charged, watchful. But from that night forward, the whisper never truly left. It was a constant, unsettling presence at the edge of her hearing, a promise of terror waiting to unfold. The spirit revealed itself slowly, methodically, as if savoring her growing dread. It was feeding on it. Her own reflection became a source of terror. The mirrors in the house began to distort her image in subtle, horrifying ways. Sometimes, her face would linger for a split second after she'd turned away, its eyes staring back with an unfamiliar, chilling malice. Other times, the reflection would smile when she wasn't. Doors would swing open on their own, always leading to rooms that were inexplicably colder than the rest of the house, a damp chill that clung to the skin. Her dreams began to bleed into her waking life. The line between nightmare and reality blurred into a terrifying haze. She would jolt awake, convinced she saw figures standing at the foot of her bed tall, faceless silhouettes, just watching, waiting. The whisper grew bolder, shedding its timid murmurs. It no longer hid in the corners or behind the static. It spoke directly to her, its voice a constant, taunting presence in her mind. "You cannot escape me," it would say as she tried to distract herself with chores. "I am the spirit of fear. I am what you dread most." It knew her anxieties, her deepest insecurities, and it used them against her, twisting her memories into weapons. Desperate for answers, Evelyn forced herself out of the oppressive atmosphere of the house and went to the town library. She spent days buried in dusty archives, combing through old town records, newspapers, and forgotten journals. And there, in a leather-bound book of local history, she found it. The Hollow House had once belonged to a man named Jonathan Hale, a fire and brimstone preacher from the late 1800s. Hale had been obsessed with the idea of purging sin through absolute terror. He preached that fear was a divine tool, that to truly repent and be saved, one must first be broken, trembling before the wrath of God. But Holly's sermons grew darker, more unhinged. He began to enact his beliefs, locking his most devout parishioners in the cold, dark basement of the church, forcing them to confront their deepest, most personal terrors in complete isolation. Some, the records noted vaguely, never emerged. When Hale died alone in his house, it was abandoned. Locals whispered that his spirit had remained, but not as the ghost of a man. They claimed it had become something else entirely, the pure, disembodied embodiment of fear itself. It wasn't Jonathan Hale haunting the house. It was the terror he had cultivated. Evelyn knew she had to leave. The knowledge of the house's history solidified her terror into a cold, hard decision. She packed her bags with frantic energy, throwing clothes and belongings into suitcases without care. She booked a train ticket for the next morning. But the night before her departure, the spirit, feeling its new vessel trying to escape, finally struck with its full force. She awoke with a gasp to find herself completely paralyzed, her body pinned to the bed by an invisible, crushing weight. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. The whisper was no longer a whisper. It was a deafening roar that filled the room, the house, her skull. "You belong to me now," it bellowed. "You carry me." "You are fear." Her vision blurred. The shadows on the walls writhed and crawled, coalescing into grotesque shapes, the contorted faces of Holly's victims screaming in silent agony, skeletal hands clawing at the air, wide, terrified eyes staring into her own. In the center of the swirling darkness, the spectral mask of Jonathan Hale appeared, his hollow gaze fixed on her, a look of grim triumph on his face, and then everything went silent. When Evelyn awoke, the sun was streaming through the window, the oppressive weight was gone. She sat up, her body aching. Her packed bags had vanished. The front door was locked from the inside, the key nowhere to be found. But the most profound change was within her. Deep inside her chest, where her own anxiety used to churn, she felt something new, a cold, coiled presence, awake and waiting. Days turned into weeks. Evelyn no longer recognized the woman in the mirror, but now the reflection didn't frighten her. She began to see the world differently. She could see the fear in others as clearly as if it were a visible aura. She saw it in the cashier's trembling hands as he counted change, in the neighbor's anxious, darting glances, in the nightmares that made the child next door cry out in his sleep. She could feel their terror, taste it on the air, and it gave her strength. The voice inside her, no longer a separate entity, but a part of her own thoughts, guided her. Spread me, feed me, become me. The resistance she once had, the desperate fight for her own mind, was gone. She stopped fighting. She opened the door and let the spirit in completely. And with each passing night, with every frightened glance she drew from a stranger, she became less human, more shadow. Ashford changed. The quiet town became quieter still, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the silence of dread. People began to speak of a woman who walked the empty streets late at night, a spectral figure whose eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dark. They said she could sense your deepest fear with just a look, and once she knew it, you would never sleep peacefully again. Families began to leave, packing up their lives to escape the creeping paranoia that had settled over the town like a permanent fog. Businesses closed their doors, their windows boarded up. Ashford was hollowing out, but the hollow house remained. Its windows glowed with a faint, sickly light, and if you stood close enough, you could hear the walls themselves pulsing with whispers. Inside, Evelyn sat in the dark, a faint smile on her lips, waiting. She was no longer Evelyn Carter, the woman who had come here seeking solitude. She was now, and forever, the spirit of fear. Fear is not a ghost you can banish with salt or sage. It's not a demon you can exorcise with holy words. It is a spirit, ancient and eternal, that finds the cracks in human hearts and makes its home there. And in the quiet town of Ashford, it found its perfect vessel. So if you ever find yourself passing through that sad, empty town, avoid the old Victorian house on the edge. Do not look into its dark windows, and above all, do not listen for its whispers. Because once the spirit of fear knows your name, it never, ever forgets. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy stories that get under your skin, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have plenty more darkness to explore together.